In this video, we are going to use a VLOOKUP function for an exact lookup. We're going to start out with our Advanced Functions class spreadsheet, and we'll start out in the Invoice tab, or the Invoice worksheet of our spreadsheet. And we can use the VLOOKUP function to scan all of the codes in column A of our worksheet tab, here, until it finds a match. Then it'll return a value in the description here from the stock tab. So essentially what we're doing with the VLOOKUP is we're telling VLOOKUP to look for this code in this column and then return the value that's in the description right next to it back into this worksheet. So let's get started. Go into the stock tab or the stock worksheet, and first thing we want to do as a best practice is we want to convert our data range into a table. To do that, we hit the insert ribbon bar and we click on table. Excel automatically recognizes the entire data set as the one table, and it automatically by default puts in that my table has headers. Obviously if you didn't have headers in there, you would want to deselect that. Click OK, and we now have a table, and you can go in and change the style if you so desire to make it a little bit more personalized to your liking. And then we want to name the table as well, and we want to use the table name that we're going to understand or recognize when we go back to our invoice work. For this exercise, we're going to call our table stock. So we put in stock in our reference up here, and now we can go back to our invoice worksheet. So click on the invoice tab at the bottom of the worksheet, and we're back at the invoice spreadsheet. Since we have the code CA74 already in cell A6, we're going to use our VLOOKUP function in cell B6 to pull the description from the stock tab or the stock table that we just created in our best practice. Excel gives us more than one way that we can get access to the function that we want. We can go to our formulas ribbon bar, and we could click on the lookup and reference, and we can find VLOOKUP alphabetically at the bottom. We could type it in directly by typing equals VLOOKUP, and you'll see as we start typing it, we see it here. We could just hit tab and the rest of it would appear. Or if we weren't quite sure of how to spell it or what the function was we were looking for, but you kind of had an idea, you could click on the insert function button, the F sub X, right on the function bar. And here we can search for it by typing VLOOKUPs. This is also good if we don't happen to recall that it's under the lookup and reference button in the formulas ribbon bar. So we can click go and click OK. And now we have our function arguments dialog box for the VLOOKUP. If we wanted to do just a single lookup, we could type in CA74 and we could fill in the rest of the fields and get our result that way. But we want to be able to pull multiple different codes from our stock table that we created. So we're going to go ahead and use A6 in our lookup value. So what we're telling VLOOKUP is to look in this cell A6 in order to find out the corresponding description, and that we'll find in the separate fields that we continue to add in here. In the table array field, this is where it comes in handy that we use the best practice of naming our table. Now if you recall, we named our table stock, so all we have to do is type in stock, as long as we spell it correctly, in this field. And now we have the reference. We're telling VLOOKUP to look at the code here in A6 and look for it in the stock table, but we have to be a little more specific with that. And we have to go in the column index number, and in column index number we can read it right here. It's the column number in the table array, in other words our stock table, from which the matching value should be returned. The first column of values in the table is column 1. So here it's a little bit different from some of the other functions in Excel in that they want you to put column number 1 or number 2 or number 3 in this field. Now I'm going to switch over to the other tab so we can see that what we're looking for is the column index number to be the second column, because this is the information, the description that we want to return back in our invoice tab. What you find though is when you do that clicking while you're in the field in the dialog box, Excel thinks you want to reference something in that area or in that field. So you have to go ahead and delete that out by hitting backspace. And we know that we wanted from our stock table, column 2 was the description, and we're already getting a little bit of a hint of what our answer is by seeing down here where the dialog box gives us the representation of the answer. For our final field, the range lookup, this is where you have to determine whether we want to have false or true in there. And what we want to do is have an exact match. So we type in false, and it really doesn't have to be in uppercase. If you notice that in this list of fields, the range lookup is the only one that's not bold, that's because the range lookup is actually an optional field. However, you want to put false in there in order to get the exact match. If you don't put false in there, it will likely find the largest value that is less than the lookup value if it can't find an exact match. And so it would put in information that is incorrect potentially. So we put false in here, and as you saw before we even put false in there, it put Breitling Chronomat 18K, and if we go back to our tab, CA74 we notice is Cartier Tank 18K. So we know that it was giving us incorrect information. So by putting in false, we're forcing it to give us an exact match. And there we can see our little look ahead at the result and see Cartier Tank 18K. We can now click OK, and we find that we have our answer in there. So let's pick a couple of others in here. We could say RO28. So we can put RO28 in here, and we can find OM68. We'll use OM68 in the last field. Now we can just copy our formula down, and we'll see that Excel populates the description for the corresponding code in each of the cells in the description column. So let's double check. OM68 is Omega Constellation Gold Top. OM68 Omega Constellation Gold Top. And then we had RO28 Rolex Oyster Ultra Prima, and sure enough it's Rolex Oyster Ultra Prima. And that's how we use the VLOOKUP function. At this point, if all you were looking for was information on the VLOOKUP function, you can go ahead and stop the video. But what I'm going to show you now is that there's a similar function called HLOOKUP, and if you haven't already figured it out, the V in VLOOKUP is for vertical, and the H in HLOOKUP will be for horizontal. So what we're going to do is I've made a copy of my stock worksheet tab. So we have the stock number 2 down here. That's the same values in the table that we have in the stock worksheet as well. In order to do this, we're going to go ahead and take our table and we're going to convert it to a range. We have to convert it back to a range. So now we have a range of data that we had before, and I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and we're going to go ahead and take it here and do an Alt-E and then an S so that we can paste it special, and we're going to transpose the data. So now we have the same table as what we had before, only the rows are columns and the columns are rows. Now you can go ahead and remove these from here, and we can just go back in again and create another table, and we'll call this table, this one time we don't have headers, so we want to make sure we deselect that, otherwise we'll have an error, and we'll call this stock 2. And you may be able to come up with a more creative name than that, but it'll work for the purpose of this exercise. So now what we're going to do, and we'll do it all on the same page just because we're going to briefly go through this and use the HLOOKUP function. So we'll just call up the HLOOKUP by doing equals sign HLOOKUP. We get our field to show up, our function to show up in the dialog box, so we can have our lookup value. And for the sake of brevity, we're just going to put the lookup value in cell B17, which right now it's not populated. We'll have to go back in and put that value in after we filled out the formula. Now the table array is the same as when we do the VLOOKUP. We're going to call it stock 2 because that's what we labeled our table here. And now we're going to look at row 2 instead of column 2. And then again, we're going to put in false. Now because we have no value in B17, which we're referencing here, we don't have an answer. So let's go back in and use the same value that we had when we did our HLOOKUP. We can see that over on here. It was CA74. So let's go ahead and put CA74 in. And we find that it's Cartier tank 18. And if we want to, we can copy this HLOOKUP formula down a couple of cells, and in here we can use the same values for the code that we used before, and all I'm doing is a simple copy and paste, and we get our answer in there. So you see the HLOOKUP formula and the VLOOKUP formula are very similar. It's just a matter of whether you're looking across rows or down columns to find your information. And that's all for this video today.